All right. That is 12 o'clock Central, so we're going to go ahead and get started. This is part of the NNP Symposium at Central States. So we have people here in the room as well as watching online. The symposium is fully funded by EPNIS, the Eric P. Newman Numismatic Education Society. So let's get started. We are joined for this presentation by Chris McDowell, who will be speaking about North American medals of the French and Indian War. He is the president of C4, the Colonial Coin Collectors Club, and it also wrote the book on Betts medals. So we have an expert. And that's it for me. I'm going to turn it over to Chris. Let's make sure your audio is coming through.
Can you hear me, Leanna?
We're doing good. All right.
Right.
Thank
Well,
you.
welcome everyone, both online and in the room. Today we're going to be talking about Betts medals, from the French and Indian War. I have to admit that even though I have a degree in history and even some master level courses in history, particularly with a focus on American military history, the French and Indian War was always a bit fuzzy to me. And it really wasn't until I started to look into these medals that the whole thing came together. So, but in a nutshell, the French and Indian War occurred between 1754 and 63, and it was a theater, the North American theater of the 7 Years' War. We're going to be referring a lot to this map. I don't know about you, whenever I read, particularly military history, I always want a good map because a map, like the general in the field, it really helps you understand what's going on. So here is a very broad map of the French and Indian War. And we're going to start off towards the bottom, right above where it says Virginia, where you see Washington, 1754. A lot of the activities at the beginning of the French and Indian War are going to center around what is Fort Duquesne, present day Pittsburgh. You can find it there on the map, Fort Duquesne. And that is where the Monongahela and the Allegheny rivers meet to form the Ohio River, which is the entryway to the central part of the United States of America. This whole war is being set up because the British colonialists are occupying the what is now the 13 or what becomes the 13 original colonies on the coast. The French have occupied what is present day Canada to the north and have really made great entryways into the interior of North America. The Virginians in particular were concerned that the French were coming down from Canada into what was the Pittsburgh area. And so in 1753, the year before the expedition that's on this map occurred, General Washington went out to sort of find out what the French were up to. At that time, they had not set up Fort Duquesne, but General Washington became aware of the French activities and became certain that when weather permitted, the French intended to come down and set up a fort at the Three Rivers, what was called at that time the Forks. And he was right. So he went back to Virginia and he told the governor of the French intentions. And the governor then sent him on a military expedition to basically to secure the Forks before the French could secure the Forks. Little known to General Washington, but the French had already done that. So General Washington proceeds out into the American hinterland and begins, in some people's opinion, it was General Washington who began what was the French and Indian War, which does become, in many historians' opinion, World War Zero. So before there was World War I, there was this French and Indian War, which was a global war. The French and Indian War, the 7 Years' War is the global war. The French and Indian War is just the North American aspect of this war. So General Washington goes into the interior of the country to secure the Forks. And when he does, he meets up with the French, who I said have already secured the Forks. He sets up what, as we all know, as every schoolboy knows, is Fort Necessity. And from there, he intends to do a lot of exploring to determine the French intentions. there was a very good article recently in the last MCA journal that really explored in depth Fort Necessity and General Washington's activities here. But I'm going to briefly tell you what happens. So while he sets up Fort Necessity, the French start to sort of probe the British, commanded at this point by General Washington, in force. The Indians who are with General Washington inform him of what's going on, and they inform him of where the French are camped out near Fort Necessity. And General Washington and the Indians go to that area and surprise the French. And it's unclear, kind of like Lexington and Concord, who fires the first shot. But either the French shoot up the ravine at the Americans, General Washington, or the British shoot down onto the French. But in any case, bedlam ensues, and the General Washington is actually able to win this skirmish and capture a large number of French soldiers. The French say they were emissaries, they were ambassadors, they were on a peace mission to deliver papers to General Washington, which in all likelihood, as General Washington said later, was a lie, because why were they being so sneaky if that was their intention? Why didn't they just approach Fort Necessity? But in any case, what happened after this battle is the Indians, who were under General Washington's command, murder in cold blood the French emissary, the gentleman who said he was the emissary, most likely just the commander. Later, when General Washington forms Fort Necessity and the British come and they overwhelm the French, overwhelm the British, they force General Washington to sign papers that admit that he murdered the French emissary. General Washington, because the papers were in French, because it was raining, he says that he didn't understand what it was that he was signing. Now, for the medal that regards this, it's stated that when General Washington went out into the wilderness, he took with him some peace medals, some gifts for what would become the allies of the British force. If that's the case, this is the most prime candidate for that. It's actually, I believe, said that Washington himself wore a medal. If he did, this is the George II Indian Peace Medal. It's a very interesting medal. There are very few of them. In fact, I think there's just maybe 7 or less that are known. It's very rare. Julie Casey found one on eBay, which is an extraordinary find. When she found it, people thought it was a fake. And having held one of these medals, you can see why you would think that. It's very light. It's much lighter than you would think, but it's a very rare medal, and it's believed that they came to America through the governor of New York, the very sad character of Governor Osborne. And I say sad because his wife had died in childbirth years before, and he basically just moped around his garden and eventually committed suicide. But he brought with him these medals, and it's believed that probably some of them made their way down to Governor Dinwiddie in Virginia, and perhaps some of these medals were taken by Washington into the interior as gifts for the Indians, either in 1753 or 1754. It is very clear that General Washington did give gifts to the Indians. It's very important in Indian culture. Whenever there was a treaty, whenever you were trying to parlay with the Indians, that you would give them gifts, and medals were often a very big part of that. So let's look what happens next. Well, after I say General Washington, he wasn't a general at the time, but after Washington was forced to surrender and retreat, the British send a very large expedition at this point under General Braddock to take Fort Duquesne and wrest it from the control of the French. And that's the Braddock expedition of 1755. General Braddock's expedition is an unmitigated disaster. At one point, the French, knowing that General Braddock with this large army was headed their way, had basically made up their mind that they were going to blow up Fort Duquesne and retreat back to in the direction of Canada. But a young French officer said, well, maybe instead we can ambush them as they cross the Monongahela River. And that's what they did. And it was just, as I said, an unmitigated disaster. You can see here, most of General Braddock's officers were killed. General Braddock himself was killed. The British ability to fight in the interior was basically eliminated for several years after the destruction of General Braddock's army. Washington himself decided that Braddock would be buried under the road that he was building to Fort Duquesne. There are no medals that honor this expedition, either from the French or the British. One of the interesting things as we look at medals, not just medals of the French and Indian War, are events that we, maybe as historians or Americans, think are seminal to history, make barely a blip so far as medals are concerned. And although General Braddock's defeat is a significant event in the French and Indian War, there are no medals to memorialize this event. Now, what happened after General Braddock's forces defeated, we're going to keep coming back to this map, is now the French and their Indian allies control the interior, not just the area around Fort Duquesne, but all of that area spreading into Western Pennsylvania. And this emboldened the Delaware Indians, who up to this point had had very good relationships with the Pennsylvania government. The Quakers under Penn and even his sons to some degree, but the Quakers in particular as a group put great emphasis on having good relations with the natives who were in their land. And so it was a bit of surprise to the Quakers that after General Braddock was defeated, that the Delaware Indians then decided to murder, kidnap, and destroy the forts and the settlers and the settlements and the farms in Western Pennsylvania. Basically, they ran wild in that area with no military force on the British side to control them. The French instigated this. The French armed their Indian allies, encouraged them to attack the English settlers, which the Indians were happy to oblige with. This comes about as a medal. A medal results from this because the Indians capture a large number of settlers and take them to their village in Kittanning, which is along the Allegheny River, about 20 miles north of Fort Duquesne of the Forks. And the government now of Pennsylvania, which is sort of shifting away from the Quaker control, decides that a military expedition is necessary to go and bring back the hostages, to give the Indians a lesson, to destroy their village and destroy their capacity to wage war against the settlers in Western Pennsylvania. The military expedition led by Colonel Armstrong then goes to this village of Kittanning, which when we think of an Indian village, we often think of teepees and things like that, but it was really made of sturdy log cabins. And they ordered the Indians to surrender. They didn't. And so there's a big battle that ensues in which the Indians actually start to turn the tables and get the better of the Pennsylvania militia when the cabins start to catch on fire. Well, unfortunately for the Indians, about a week before, the French had delivered to them a large amount of gunpowder, which exploded with such force that the French at Fort Duquesne, 20 miles away, heard the explosion, spread the fire to the other cabins, at which point the battle is turned. The militia then get the upper hand, kill Captain Jacobs, who is the leader of this group of the Delawares who have taken these people captive. And then they go back, the militia then goes back with some, very few actually, of the hostages back to the eastern part of Pennsylvania. This medal on the left is the shield for the city of Philadelphia, which had this medal made. This particular medal that was given in silver to the officers who accompanied Colonel Armstrong on the expedition to take the village of Kittanning. This one is the only one, in my opinion, that can be proven to have been issued to an officer, and this was issued to General Hugh Mercer. He wasn't a general at the time; he was a captain. General Mercer becomes a general during the American Revolutionary War, is killed in the Battle of Princeton. This is his personal medal that was issued to him in that battle. So this medal was made in Philadelphia, and there are some very nice early silver ones that were issued at the same time. This is one of those which can show better the design. These, the man who struck him, his son works at the United States Mint. He takes the dies to the mint, and the United States Mint from, I think, probably a little bit before 1801, but up through 1874, makes restrikes from the original dies until, as you can see from the left in particular, what's the obverse with the shield, the dies just totally crumble. In between, about 1810, a man named Thomas Halliday, who worked in Birmingham as a making metals. He was he was an engraver. He made an exact copy of the Battle of Kittanning, or the Kittanning medal. Most likely he did this because he was upset with the United States Mint, because the United States Mint had taken his design from General Washington after Washington had given up the presidency, and they made copies of his medal. So I think in return, he made copies of the U.S. Mint's medal. And this is a very, very lovely copy of the Battle of Kittanning medal. The Battle of Kittanning medal is copied up until and produced by the United States Mint up until the 1970s. So after the dies crumble, they make copy dies at the Mint. This is a copy die. One of the ways that you can tell the original from the copy is through the 6 and the date. In the original, there's a die crack, and there are other diagnostics. So this medal is detailed in volume 2 of my book on Betz medals, so you can tell all the various medals one from another. But this is the Battle of Kittanning medal, and it is the first military medal, predates the award of the Purple Heart by many years. And so it's the first true American medal and the first military medal all in one. And it's very pleasant in its folkiness. The next medal is, as I told you, after Braddock's defeat, the government in Pennsylvania wants to reestablish peace with the Delaware Indians at all cost. And so there are several peace councils in Easton, Pennsylvania. And this is the Treaty of Easton medal. It is the original Treaty of Easton medals are struck on 8 reali. So it has this 8 reali edge around it. And the same men who made the Battle of Kittanning medal made the Treaty of Easton medal. So they have both the war medal and the peace medal. The peace medals were given to the Indians, in order, again, to solidify a treaty. The Indians realized about the second treaty or council at Easton that the tide had turned because now you can see Forbes expedition, 1758. So now General Forbes, it's been 3 years since General Braddock's defeat, and now the British have reorganized and are ready to go and take it to the French at Fort Duquesne. And General Forbes, like Braddock, built a road towards Fort Duquesne, and unlike last time, Fort Duquesne falls to the British forces. There is no medal for General Forbes and his expedition, but there was from 1909 to 1970 Forbes Field, where the Pittsburgh Pirates played in Pittsburgh, which was named in honor of General Forbes. And you can see here the strategic importance of the city of Pittsburgh, where these three rivers meet. The French continued after they took Fort Duquesne to push into the interior. If you will look here on the map, if you can find where it says Fort Oswego near where it says New York, Lake Ontario. So the French, at the beginning of the French and Indian War, as we've been talking about so far, the French really take it to the British in North America. And so they make, and not only in North America, I should say, but around the world, the French forces have a series of victories at the beginning of the 7 Years' War that also encompasses victories in the North American war theater, one of which is at the Fort Oswego, which, as you can see, as saw before, was at the shore of Lake Ontario. And the French took a series of forts, culminating in the taking of Fort Oswego. As they were taking the forts, the people would get up and they would go to the next fort. And so Oswego was the last in a series of forts that the British took, and it was filled with refugees, with soldiers from other forts, and the French were able to take that along with their Indian allies. Unfortunately, what happens here at Oswego is the Indians got into the rum that was at the fort and became highly intoxicated, and then began just murdering the civilians in cold blood. And this rampage went on for quite some time, and a large number of civilians and military prisoners of war were murdered. Montcalm, who by all accounts was an honorable man and a good gentleman, an officer, did his level best to stop the bloodbath, but was unable to. This was just a precursor to what happened the next year at Fort William Henry, where the same thing played out. The French excused or tried to excuse their actions by saying that they weren't able to talk to some of their Indian allies, that nobody spoke their language, that they couldn't stop them, that they had no control over them. But also at Fort William Henry, the French Indian allies murdered the captives, particularly the wounded and civilians. The next major theater of the war, and really what comprises maybe even the bulk of French and Indian medals, is at Louisburg. You can see Louisburg if you look for the Gulf of St. Lawrence up near Nova Scotia. You can see the Louisburg. Fortress Louisburg was the most significant French fort in North America. It controlled the mouth of the St. Lawrence Seaway. It controlled the northern Atlantic. The French put what would be the equivalent of millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars into Fortress Louisburg. And it had been taken by the American colonists previously, but the French had reinforced it, and they believed it to be an impregnable fortress, which of course it was not. And the British are able to do a combined arms attack on the Fortress Louisburg from their army and their navy. First, the army lands near the city, near the fortress, and takes a lighthouse that commands the high ground. And using that position, they bombard the city night and day for a very long period of time. This is a siege of Fortress Louisbourg. The French are unable, because it's such a great distance from France, to relieve the siege, and the British control, for the most part, the North Atlantic. And so this is depicted on the obverse of this is the British admiral who commanded the fleet that attacks Fortress Louisbourg. On the reverse here, we see what's really the depiction of the Army's contribution to the defeat of Fortress Louisbourg, which is the capture of the lighthouse and the bombardment of the fortress. The fortress contained the largest buildings in North America at the time. The British put hot shot into their cannon and caught all these buildings on fire. But yet the siege went on and on. But there are a number of these medals that come out from this battle at Fortress Louisbourg, honoring the admiral. The design varies slightly on the reverse from one medal to the next, but they're all in this sort of very simple style. These are not medals that are silver or gold. They're pinchbeck, and they were probably sold on the streets of London, Birmingham, to people in honor of the British victory, similar to the Admiral Vernon medals in many ways. The look of these medals is similar to Admiral Vernon medals. There would appear to have been several engravers of these medals. They were probably made in a variety of places. One of the things that you learn about medals of this period is that if someone had a successful medal design, there is no intellectual property. There is no copyright that keeps somebody from copying your design and sending their people out into the street to sell your medal's design that they've made. And so a lot of these medals are similar, probably made by different engravers and struck at different places. Here's the surrender. Now, going back to what we learned about Oswego and Fort William Henry, the French were very reluctant to surrender Fort Louisbourg because they feared that the British would retaliate against them and murder them, as the French and their Indian allies had murdered the surrendered British soldiers. But the British, to their great credit, treated all the surrendered soldiers and civilians with great dignity and respect. None of them were harmed. And here we see it. When I looked at the reverse of this medal, at first I thought that the man on the ground who's surrendering the fort, I thought he had a hook on his hand, but what he's holding in his left hand are the keys to the fortress, and in his right hand, his sword, and an indication of the surrender of the fortress. This medal is one of the smallest, actually. I've got them all the same size in this presentation so you can see them. But in real life, this medal is pretty small, which is unusual that you would have such a small non-gold or silver medal. It's another one. And they're all very similar. The boats and the people have a similar look to them until you get to this one. This medal is not in pinchbeck. It's not in copper. This is in gold, and it's in silver. And the design is not folksy. It's not cheap. This is not something being sold on the streets of London and Birmingham. This is a significant historical object, a medal given to the officers, in particular, the naval officers of the battle. So Louisbourg falls as a result of the naval engagement of sorts. The French have a number of ships that are in the harbor at Louisbourg, which really keep the British fleet at bay. And also they can use the cannon on those ships to bombard the army as it may approach the walls of the city. But in the night of, sorry, I don't have the date, the British admirals decide what they're going to do is they're going to slip some men in a rowboat into the harbor to capture the remaining two French ships. And so these men row in the fog into the harbor, and they approach the French ships. When the sentries on the ship hail them, and they don't know the password, they begin shooting back and forth. The British sailors then board the French warships and overwhelm the Navy, the French Navy on the ships, and capture the two French. Well, the soldiers in the fort can hear all this going on, and when they realize that their own French ships have now been taken over by the British, they begin firing on their own ships. And one of the ships it catches fire and explodes and sinks. The other French ship, they are able to row it out of the harbor, and you can see maybe some of the rowboats in front of the ship on the left. And it joins the French fleet. The next morning, the French commander of the fortress surrenders. So this medal commemorates that event. And the gold medals here can be traced to many of the officers, can be traced to the officers who led the assault on the ships, and also several of the British officers who commanded vessels there. What's interesting is although on the obverse of this medal, it talks about, you can see it's got a sailor and a soldier. It's talking about the joint arms attack on Louisburg. There's really no indication that this medal was awarded to any of the soldiers, but just to the naval commanders. With the fall of Fortress Louisburg also came the great riches of the North Atlantic and all the fishing that went with it. And so this was at the time and is today a significant military victory, although it's something that we don't learn about in our history classes at all. But you can see at the time, this was a much more important to the people than the other battles that we've been talking about. Well, now the war has turned. The tide has turned. Louisburg is the key to Canada. With the fall of Louisburg, for all intents and purposes, this war is over, but no one really quite knows it at the time. But it's the war is really turned in favor now of the British. Lord Pitt and the British government has really put a lot of thought and effort into this conquest of Canada, and now it is underway. So British victories, the British are winning, but what about their medal? Are they going to have a little quiet victory? No, they're very excited that things have turned their way. And so some people think that this medal is in sort of reaction to the French medal of their victories. This is the British medal touting the British-American victories of the French and Indian War up to 1758. It's not just in the French and Indian War, I should say, but the 7 Years' War. It wasn't just in the North American theater that things began to go the way of the British, but all around the world, things begin to go the British way. And their British Navy and British Army is really taking it to the French. And so this medal is created to honor that event, this British Victories Medal. There are a series of these medals. There's with combinations and mulings and so forth. Here's two reverses. So the British produced their own medal, similar to the Oswego medal. The next major military action that occurs is Quebec. You can see that. So after the British take Fortress Louisburg, the French are unable to keep the British from sailing down the St. Lawrence Seaway to Quebec. But Quebec is probably the most naturally defended city in all of North America. Although it looks very easy to take from the map here, there is a very steep wall that goes up from the St. Lawrence River to the city of Quebec that overlooks the St. Lawrence River, that makes it very easy for defenders within the city to command the river and any ships that approach through the river. The French had spent a lot of money on the fortifications of Quebec, and it, like Fortress Louisbourg, was considered to be untakeable. Of course, it wasn't. This is a medal that honors the taking of Quebec, like Fortress Louisbourg, but even to a greater extent. The taking of Quebec is a joint arms affair, and the obverse of this medal honors the naval commander, Sanders, with the trident, and Wolfe, General Wolfe, with the Roman Legion standard. And so it is a joint victory between the British Navy and the British Army that takes the city of Quebec. And this is I highlight this medal. It's not in Betts, but it is a medal that was in the Ford sale, and it shows that if you're a good student of history in these medals, there are still, even today, hidden gems out there, medals that have not been recognized for what they are. Not all the medals are in Betts, and so if you look long and you look hard enough, you're apt to potentially find one of these hidden Betts medals. I say hidden because they're not in Betts. Let's talk a little bit more about the taking of the city of Quebec. So, as I told you, you can see here the cliffs that Quebec is on the left. The cliffs are on the left, obviously, too. They command that seaway, and Quebec is just a real fortress to get to. The British are able to run the gauntlet past the city, command the river on both sides, and lay siege to Quebec. In September, they have word that there is a relief force of French on the way to relieve the siege at Quebec. And if that relief force if it arrives, then it'll become impossible for the British to take the city. And so General Wolfe, in the night of September 12th, 1758, 59, excuse me, I think it's 59, sends his troops at the middle of the night up the cliff of Quebec there and onto the fields, the plains of Abraham, which is the plain on top of that cliff before the city. And when the French wake up on September 13th, they see, much to their surprise, the British Army out in front of their fort, something that they didn't expect. And at that point, they do something that's not so smart, is they run out from behind the fortress that is Quebec, the walls, and onto the plains of Abraham to face General Wolfe. General Wolfe has really surrounded himself. On the one side is the French relief force coming to get him. On the other side, or to relieve Quebec, on the other side is this cliff, and on the other side is virgin forest, and before him is now the French army that's come out of the city. He's only able to grab one field gun up to the top of the cliffs. During the battle, General Wolfe is mortally wounded, and he denies medical attention. He's taken to the rear. As he lays bleeding, one of the men near him says, "They run," and General Wolfe says, "Who runs?" He says, "The French." And he says, "Praise God, I've seen victory." General Montcalm, same man who was at Oswego commands the French forces. Similar to Wolfe, Montcalm is also mortally wounded, and he's taken into Quebec, where he asks how long does he have to live, and they tell him hours, and he says, well, thank God I won't see the British in Quebec. The next day, the city surrenders, and it is an overwhelming British victory. Out of that comes this death of Wolfe. Wolfe becomes a national hero in Great Britain, as he should have. It was his plan that led to the victory. It was a very inventive, a very dangerous, a bold plan, and if he would not have executed it, there's no doubt that they would not have been able to take the city of Quebec. This medal, Betts 422, honors General Wolfe in his sacrifice and the taking of the village or the city of Quebec. The next medal here is not in Betts, and I would say that this is, as far as I could ever tell, Dave Bauer's favorite medal. He probably sent me pictures of it 15 or 20 times, asking me what I thought about it. And I do think enough about it that I put it in my book. All these French and Indian war medals are going to be in volume 2 of my book on Betts medals. This medal also honors General Wolfe. If you remember back to the Louisburg medals, it has very much the look of those taking of Fortress Louisburg medals. The soldiers on the reverse look the same to me. The buildings look the same, and there's really little doubt that this medal was made by the same people. It's not like the naval medal that was in gold, but more like that pinchbeck medal, the cheap medals sold on the street. This one in honor of General Wolfe. George II does not have long to live. And so you can see he dies in 1760. He dies right after the fall of Montreal. And there is, after his death, a medal that also encompasses his reign and the success of his reign in the 7 Years' War. If you look on the reverse of the medal, it also, that is Lord Pitt in the center, because the 7 Years' War was really as much of a victory for the government, the British government, led by Pitt, as it was certainly the king. Pitt led the British through this war in spectacular fashion. It becomes a 7 Years' War, not just the French and Indian aspect of it, but the entire war is a tremendous British victory. And so this medal honors the reign of George II with his victories everywhere. But victory is not quite complete for us in our story, because there's one more bastion held by the French in North America, and that is Montreal. At this point, Montreal has become, for all, it's surrounded. It can't get any relief from France because the St. Lawrence Seaway is now commanded by the British. Fort Louisburg is gone. Quebec is gone. The fortresses, the forts that they had built going into the Ohio area have all been taken. What remains is Montreal. And Montreal falls in September of 1760. May of 1760. Quebec fell in September. May of 1760. This is Betts Medal 428. That it does not exist. It is a mistake that Betts made. He believed that this was a medal because it was a pamphlet that was produced in 1765. The city of Montreal, not dissimilar to Moscow, when it was taken by the French, caught on fire and burnt to the ground. And the British put together a relief organization to help the people who were displaced by the fire. This pamphlet was produced. Betts and others believed that these vignettes that were on the pamphlet were copies of medals, but they weren't. There is no medal. There is no Betts 428. This medal here commemorates now Montreal taken, and it is a very attractive medal, and it's in silver. It honors Amherst, the fall of Canada. Now all of Canada after Montreal falls belongs to the British. A little bit more information. In my book, I've got detailed information about all of these medals. And there's some disagreement as to the aesthetics of this medal, about whether it is beautiful or not. There's many people who proclaim it's one of the most attractive of the French and Indian War medals, but as you can see there, Robert McLaughlin was a French numismatist, now the 19th century, and he thought otherwise. He thought that the beaver on the reverse looked more like a dog, and he might have had a point. These medals are frequently, the ones that are done by the SOC, have an edge design. One of the real shortcomings of catalogs and books on medals is that they frequently overlook the edge. The edge is the third side of the medal. And on many of these medals, they honor William Pitt. So it says William Pitt administering. And that is an edge design that's on several of these medals. And there are some medals that don't have the edge design. And in a catalog, sometimes they don't differentiate between those that do and those that don't have this edge design. So even though, in my opinion, I would rather have one with the edge design, there's sometimes no way of knowing, because the description doesn't even tell you about this really lovely edge design that's on some of these medals. This is another Canada subdued, sort of a total victory medal. This medal harkens back. If you look at that design on the reverse, it harkens back to a Roman coin design that talks about the captives after the second fall of the destruction of the Second Temple, the Jewish captives. Very similar appearance to that medal. One final medal is this medal, which is, in many people's opinion, the most historically important, the most significant of all the Indian peace medals. North American Indian peace medals is this medal right here, which is the Montreal Indian Peace Medal. It is so as the British Army approached Montreal from land, they had with them a contingent of Indian allies, Mohicans, Iroquois, and other Indian allies that were brought together with the British force by Sir William Johnston, who was a magnificent administrator of Indian affairs for the British government. And the Indians helped in the ultimate attack and victory at Montreal, although many of them had abandoned the expedition because they were not permitted to loot the French forts as they went along. If you were an Indian along sort of the ride with the British or the French, you weren't being paid. And so what was in it if you were one of those Indian allies? Well, a lot of them did it because they hoped to to get loot from the forts that were taken along the way. And when the British wouldn't let them do that, most of the Indians actually went home, but some stayed. They stayed because of William Johnston and his persuasiveness and his ability to help organize the Indians in the attack in Montreal. And just he was a man who always treated the Indians fairly. They respected him. He respected them, which is unlike many other people, both French and Indians, who held the Indians in low regard. But so this medal was made in New York City. So after Montreal falls, Johnston wants the Indians that participated to receive some award, some recognition for their participation in the battle. This is on the side that has the design that's supposed to be Montreal, but it looks nothing like Montreal because the engraver who made the medal had never been to Montreal. So it's just his imagination as to what Montreal might have looked like, but it looks nothing like that. The reverse of this medal is blank, was intentionally left blank, the intent being to engrave the name of the Indian and his tribe on the reverse, and that the recipient of this medal could wear this medal around his neck, and he would have all privileges to enter any British fort, ingress and egress of British forts, and be able to travel through British territory, because by wearing this medal, he was designating himself to be a friend of the British government and a man who had fought bravely at Montreal as an ally of the British. There are only 7 of these medals that we're able to track. Some of those medals haven't been seen for 100 years, but all of them are engraved. Well, I should say they have the name because they're all individual. They're all real important pieces of history. They're all significant objects. They are very expensive when they actually cross the auction block, selling for over $100,000 each. But this is the only medal that's being produced for the Indians during the war. That George II medal that George Washington took with him was made in London, but this medal is made in New York City. And so it's also one of the earliest medals made in America to be distributed to people in America for an event that occurred in North America. And with that, Leanna, I got about 6 minutes left. I can take any questions anybody has, and I'm glad to give greater detail about any of these medals that we've discussed.
All right, then I'm going to have you stop your screen share. There should be a red button at the top of your screen that says stop share. We'll get that down. Great. All righty. Then we can take questions online. Just click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to send them in. Otherwise, let's start off. Do we have any questions in the room? Yes?
I have often seen reference to pinchback metal. What exactly was it?
I can answer that. If you think about what is brass, there's a wide spectrum of the alloys that go into brass to make it. And so this gentleman named Pinchbeck was I think he made watches and other things in London, but he discovered a combination of alloys that would give brass a gold appearance. So it could actually fool, at least at first blush, some people to make them think that it was gold. And so Pinchbeck, it's B-E-C-K, I believe, brass is brass that's this special combination of the alloys that go into brass that gives it this gold appearance. The gold appearance, unlike gold, which doesn't tarnish, Pinchbeck tarnishes. So the metals that I showed you, they don't look gold, but when they were first made, they had the appearance of a gold metal, and they're very beautiful when they first come out. So it's kind of like a copper penny when it first is made. A brand new copper penny has a very different look from a copper penny that's several years old. Similar, this Pinchbeck looks like gold. It's best I can answer it. I use at one time I knew the actual composition, but I don't know it now.
All right, we have multiple people online wanting to know the same thing. Do you have a target publication date for volume 2 of your Betts Metal book?
Yes, I've completed, as far as I'm concerned, volume 2, and I'm actually well into volume 3. In fact, in order to prepare this, I had to go back and look at things that I did 2 or more years ago about metals I wrote. So it was a nice refresher for me. But I have completed the manuscript. I have turned the manuscript in. The book is going to be published by C4. The volume 1 was published by ANS. This volume 2 is going to be published by C4. We're going to have it done at the same printer so that it has the same appearance and size as volume 1. So really the only thing that should be different is it's going to be C4 on the spine. If certain people would get me the manuscript back, I would think this book could be out and ready by November of this year. My goal is to have it ready and out in time for the C4 convention. And that's possible because I've been finished with it for months, although editors, they'll have this and that, but I don't expect there to be many revisions necessary. So I'm well into volume 3 right now. Volume 3 will cover the American Revolution. Volume 2 goes up through the end of the French and Indian War.
All right. Do we have any other questions in the room?
Sure.
All right.
The French and Indian War is referred to as World War Zero. What conflicts were going on in other parts of the world at that time?
Did he say what other context?
What conflicts?
Oh yeah, well, first there were naval engagements all over the world. The French and the British had battles in India also. The French had what they called factories, and they had areas that they had taken over on the Indian subcontinent. The British attacked the French areas, the French attacked the British areas, but also in the Mediterranean, if there was a number of engagements between the French and the British. Also in mainland Europe, it becomes, Frederick the Great aligns himself with the British, and there's wars it also becomes a bit of a Protestant versus Catholic war on the mainland in Europe. But there are fights in the lowlands, there are fights in Poland and in Germany. It is a true world war that's taken place from Asia to Europe to North America, and that's why it's called by many people World War Zero.
All right, we have another one from online. While outside the time frame of your presentation, do you collect the James Moody National Series of the British victories over the French during the war against Napoleon?
It is outside my area. I mostly focus on colonial type things. I'm not saying that those wouldn't be interesting. The problem is everything in numismatic is interesting, and at some point you have to tell yourself to stop and put some brakes on it. So I try to focus on colonial and American colonial history and American colonial metals and coins. My primary collection is Connecticut coppers from 1785 to 88.
All right. Do you think that the medals issued by the British particularly were given purely as an expedient means of coercing the Indians into becoming allies, knowing full well that the promises made were never going to be kept?
Yeah, well, as everybody, if you ever read the Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, you'll know that the history of Native Americans is a very sad history, because it is one series of treaties and broken promises. It's hard to get into the mind of the people at the time, but I think it was probably always intended that they would continue to push west. At least some persons what is interesting is what happens after the French and Indian War. The British believe that they no longer have any use for the Indians. Now they control all of North America. The French are gone, and therefore they don't feel that the Indians can ever really rally and attack them. And then what happens is they stop giving medals to the Indians. And then what happens is Pontiac's rebellion. The Indians have one last true assault on the British in Pontiac's rebellion, and they attack the British forts all up and down the interior to the point where there's only one fort, Fort Niagara, that really stands. The British are totally taken back. They thought the Indians could never to take a British fort that was commanded by British officers. They were very much surprised, and really it's racism, because they feel that the Indians are an inferior race and that they could never successfully attack a British fort, and they were proven wrong. And after they were proven wrong, you get the Happy While United medals. They realize, hey, we got to get along with these people, and so they enter into a series of peace negotiations and treaties with the Indians, which results in the George III Indian Peace Medals, which start with the Happy While United medals. I put that Montreal medal as the first of the George III peace medals because it's made while George III is king. But there are a series of George III Indian peace medals that run into the War of 1812. Then the British, when they get in the war, the American Revolution, they see the Indians as an ally with them against the Americans. And then they see the Indians as allies against the Americans during the War of 1812. And so Indian medals continue. They find that they feel from time to time that they have no use for the Indians, and they're not going to give them any gifts. They're not going to give them any medals. And then they're proven wrong, and they go back to giving them medals again and again. I hope that can answer the question. Indian peace medals are really, really interesting.
Okay, do we have any other questions in the room? Nope. Okay, we have one other one online, and I think we've touched on this, but just so everyone knows what to look out for. What is the specific title of your new book, and where should people keep an eye out when it is available? Where will it be?
What I have is the title. Wait a minute, sorry. The title is Medals of the Americas, the Betts Companion, Volume 2. And then the subtitle is Medals of Colonization, New World Proclamation Pieces of Ferdinand VI and Charles III, Medals of the Intercolonial Wars, Indian Peace Medals of George III, and many others. So the short title is Medals of the Americas, the Betts Companion, Volume 2. So I didn't change up the true title all that much. And it'll be sold through C4. And then we have David Fanning and Charlie Davis are the distributors of C4 books. And so the book will be available through David Fanning and Charlie Davis, who are both wonderful men and very good partners with C4 and have distributed all of our books for many years. At least Charlie Davis has. David Fanning is a new partner, but you'll be able to purchase it through Fanning or Davis.
All right, we had one more come in online. Who was DC on the 1760 Montreal medal?
All right. VC, is that what it says?
Yes.
Let me find out. And that is the Indian medal, or I have to figure out which one it is. Give me a second here.
I've got 1760 Montreal medal. It was DCF. They clarified.
It was what?
DCF. Who was DCF?
That is, yeah, it's Daniel Christian Forter, who was an engraver in New York City. He engraved this medal, and when it came time to do the Happy While United medals, he did some of those. He was a Swiss national who came to America for a brief period of time. And he then went back to Europe and disappeared. So we don't know what ultimately happened to Daniel Christian, Fueter. And that is not part of the design of the medal, but it is the maker's mark. So his name is on the medal, not as having participated in the Battle of Montreal, but as having made it similar to how somebody might put their stamp on a spoon or a piece of hollowware, silverware. So that is his stamp. That's his name. That's how it ends up on that Montreal medal. It's a good question.
Okay, we have another one in the room.
How many total volumes do you anticipate for your Bet's Companion?
How many total what volumes? 3. I hope to wrap it up with the 3rd volume, which will take us all through up through the American Revolution. And I'm hoping that they'll become easier and easier to do as I get with more and more information and closer to time. But there's always, some of those medals I can write up in a weekend, and then I'll come across one that'll take me a month or a month and a half, and I just never know from medal to medal. And so it's always an adventure. It's so much fun because every medal is different, and so it's really and I learned so much. I bet probably everybody who listened to this learned more about the French and Indian War than they did in school, and that's the stuff I get to learn about. And so it's a lot of fun, not just the medals, but the history that's behind them. And I think that when you know the history behind the medal, it makes the medal so much more significant to you when you hone it.
We had a lot of nodding in the room and a couple people online saying, yes, they did learn more here than in school about the French and Indian Wars. All right, then I don't have anything else online. Last call in the room. Nope. All right, then I think that's going to wrap us up. Thank you so much, Chris, for taking the time to come back. We're always happy to have you at the symposium.
My pleasure.
For everyone else, our next presentation will be starting at 1:30 Central. We've got Jesse Goplin with a kind of intro to collecting note geld. If you caught his talk from yesterday, this one will be much lighter. So hope you all will join us for that. And remember, all of these are being recorded, and the recordings will be available on the NNP as well as YouTube in about 2 to 3 weeks. If you want to receive an email when those are up, you're welcome to subscribe to our email list on the symposium website, or we have a sign-up paper at the front of the room here. We'll also be announcing that on all of the symposium social media channels. So that's it for me. Hope you all be back to join us here in about 20 minutes. Thank you.